Oh, look who finally broke the silence. Except it wasn't you. It was them. Those beautiful, self-righteous ghosts who swore they'd moved on. Those polished, smiling creatures who claimed they were fine. Those master manipulators who promised themselves they'd never speak your name again. Welcome back to the truth. Or should I say, welcome to the confession booth they built out of their own unraveling. Because if you're still here, if you're still watching, you already know something shifted, something cracked, something in their carefully constructed fortress of lies finally collapsed under the weight of your absence. And now they're doing something they swore they'd never do. They're talking. Not to you, no. You're too powerful for that. They're spilling their guts to strangers, therapists, bartenders, random people on the internet, anyone who'll listen to the story of the one who got away by simply walking away. Let's get surgical here. You went silent for 427 days, 14 months, 61 weeks, 427 mornings where you didn't explain, didn't defend, didn't beg for understanding. You just vanished into your healing like smoke through their fingers. And they laughed at first, didn't they? They celebrated, threw little mental parties, told themselves and anyone who'd listen that your silence was proof. Proof you were guilty, proof you were broken, proof you couldn't handle the heat. They wore your silence like a trophy. See, they finally gave up. They finally realized they were wrong. They're probably somewhere drowning in regret. But then, something terrifying happened. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and your silence didn't break. It didn't crack. It didn't beg to be heard. It just existed, heavy, permanent, unbothered. And that's when the panic set in. Because silence, real silence, the kind that comes from genuine peace and not from weakness, is the loudest scream they'll ever hear. Your silence wasn't surrender. It was a statement. It said, I don't need your version of events to sleep at night. I don't need your validation to know my truth. I don't need your closure to move forward. And that message, that wordless declaration of independence, it shattered something inside them they didn't even know was fragile. Their ego, see, they needed you to fight back. They needed you to scream, to cry, to post cryptic messages, to seek revenge, to prove you were still tangled in the web they spun. Because as long as you were reacting, they still had power. As long as you were defending, they were still relevant. As long as you cared about their narrative, they mattered. But you stopped playing. You took your energy, your attention, your emotional investment, and you redirected it inward. And they couldn't survive that. So here's where it gets beautifully tragic. Month 3 of your silence, they started cracking jokes about you to mutual friends, fishing for information disguised as casual conversation. Have you heard from them? I wonder how they're doing. I hope they're okay. Translation: please tell me they're suffering. Please tell me they miss me. Please tell me I still matter. But the reports came back empty. You weren't posting. You weren't asking about them. You weren't dropping hints. You were just gone. Fully, completely, authentically gone. And that's when the jokes stopped being funny. Month 6, they started the comparison game. Every new person in their life got measured against the silence you left behind. Every conversation felt shallow. Every connection felt temporary. Every laugh felt forced. Because here's the secret they won't admit. You weren't just a person in their life. You were the standard, the benchmark, the mirror that reflected back their own depth or lack thereof. And now that mirror was gone, and all they had left were funhouse reflections that distorted everything. Month 9, the real unraveling began. They started therapy, and the therapist asked the question they'd been avoiding. Tell me about the people you've lost. And your name came up first, not last, not buried in a list. First, the wound they couldn't stop picking, the ghost they couldn't stop feeding. They tried to paint you as the villain at first, crafted this beautiful narrative where you were the problem, the toxic one, the manipulator, the one who destroyed everything good. But therapists, real ones, they don't just nod, they dig. What did they actually do? Silence. Can you give me specific examples? Silence. Or is it possible you're projecting your own guilt onto their memory? And there it was. The moment they realized they weren't talking to a therapist to heal from you. They were talking to a therapist to heal from themselves, the version of themselves that destroyed something real because they were too broken to water it, too scared to protect it, too selfish to deserve it. Month 12, they hit the internet, Reddit threads, anonymous forums. How do you move on from someone who won't fight for you? Except that's not the real question. The real question underneath is, how do I cope with the fact that they moved on without needing me to understand why? They wrote essays in comment sections, paragraphs and paragraphs detailing their pain, their confusion, their justified anger at your audacity to heal quietly. And strangers, beautiful strangers who didn't know either of you, started responding. Sounds like you're the one who can't let go. Maybe their silence is the answer you're refusing to hear. Have you considered that you were the problem? And those comments, those tiny daggers from people with cartoon avatars and usernames like TruthSeeker83, those cut deeper than anything you ever said, because it meant the world could see what they'd been denying. They were the villain, and your silence was the evidence. 14 months in, present day, they're at bars telling your story to strangers who'll never meet you. They're crying to coworkers who barely know their last name. They're texting old friends at 2 a.m. Do you think they ever think about me? And here's the part that would almost be sad if it wasn't so poetic. They're confessing things they never admitted when you were there. Confessing how they sabotaged the connection. Confessing how they lied, how they manipulated, how they projected their insecurities onto your kindness. Confessing how they took your loyalty for granted. Confessing how they mistook your patience for weakness. Confessing how they realized too late that you weren't the lesson, you were the teacher, and they failed the class. They're telling strangers things they should have told you. Apologies you'll never hear. Realizations that came too late to matter. Regrets that taste like poison every single morning. But here's the kicker. The part that makes this whole thing a masterpiece of ironic justice. You're not waiting for those confessions. You're not checking to see if they finally understand. You're not hovering around their energy, wondering if they've changed. You're building. You're evolving. You're becoming the version of yourself that doesn't need their validation to feel whole. And that is what's driving them to the edge of sanity. Because they wanted you to be stuck. They needed you to be frozen in the pain they caused. They required you to be broken so they could feel powerful. But you didn't cooperate. You didn't give them that satisfaction. You took your silence and turned it into a fortress they can't breach, a kingdom they can't enter, a peace they can't disturb. You became unreachable not because you're hiding, but because you're operating on a frequency they can't access anymore. Let's talk about what your silence actually did to them on a psychological level, because this is where it gets clinical. Humans are wired for closure. We need endings. We need explanations. We need to understand the why behind the what. It's how we process trauma, how we move forward, how we integrate painful experiences into our narrative. But you didn't give them that. You didn't hand them a neat little bow-wrapped explanation. You didn't provide the closure they felt entitled to. You just stopped engaging. And that created something called ambiguous loss. It's a psychological state where the person is gone but not dead, absent but not explained, finished but not concluded. It's the most torturous form of grief because the brain can't categorize it, can't file it away, can't move on from it. And so it loops and loops and loops. They replay conversations, searching for the moment they lost you. They analyze your last words, looking for hidden meanings. They stalk your social media, not because they care about your life, but because they're desperately trying to solve the equation of how you're fine without them. Your silence became a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. They just reflect. Every time they think about you, they're forced to confront themselves, the version of themselves that wasn't enough, the version that chose ego over connection, the version that burned down something beautiful because they were too afraid to admit they didn't know how to tend the garden. And that reflection, it's unbearable. So they talk. They confess to strangers, because strangers don't know the before. Strangers can't compare the person they're pretending to be now with the person they actually were. Strangers offer temporary absolution without requiring real accountability. A bartender nods sympathetically. That's rough, buddy. And for 3 seconds they feel understood. A therapist says, you're being too hard on yourself. And for 5 minutes they feel forgiven. An internet stranger types, you deserve better. And for a moment they believe they were the victim. But then they go home, and the silence is still there. Your silence, louder than any words you could have screamed. Here's what they're confessing in those dark 3 a.m. moments. The truths they're whispering to people who'll forget them by morning. I thought they needed me more than I needed them. Confession number 1. The recognition that you were never dependent. You were just devoted. And they mistook devotion for desperation. I tested them over and over, waiting for them to fail. Confession number 2. The admission that they were the saboteur, the one setting fires just to see if you'd stay through the smoke. I wanted them to fight for me, but I never fought for them. Confession number 3. The painful realization that they demanded a level of effort they never reciprocated. I thought their kindness was weakness. Confession number 4. The understanding that strength isn't aggression, it's endurance. And you had mountains of it while they had pebbles. I projected all my insecurities onto them and called it truth. Confession number 5. The hardest one. The acknowledgement that every accusation was a confession. Every criticism was a mirror. They're confessing to strangers because strangers can't hold them accountable, can't pull up receipts, can't say, but I was there, And that's not how it happened. Strangers accept the edited version, the highlight reel, the narrative where they're confused and hurt rather than calculating and cruel. But you know the unedited version. You lived through the deleted scenes. You survived the behind-the-scenes chaos they're now rewriting as misunderstandings. And your silence, your refusal to correct their revisionist history, it's the most powerful statement you could make. It says, I don't need to defend the truth. The truth defends itself. And anyone who matters already knows it. That's the part that's destroying them. Not that you're speaking against them, but that you don't need to. Your life, your peace, your growth, it speaks louder than any defense ever could. Month 14. And they're spiraling in ways they can't articulate. They're successful on paper, maybe, hitting goals, checking boxes, maintaining appearances. But there's this emptiness they can't name, this void they can't fill. They try new relationships, new hobbies, new cities, new versions of themselves. But everything feels like a costume. Everything feels temporary. Everything feels like they're running from something rather than running towards something. And they are. They're running from the truth that your silence revealed, that they had something real and they destroyed it, that they had someone genuine and they contaminated it with their toxicity, that they had a connection most people spend lifetimes searching for and they treated it like it was replaceable, and now it's gone. And they're surrounded by people, but they've never felt more alone, because none of these people are you. None of these connections have the depth. None of these conversations reach the places you used to reach effortlessly. So they confess to their new partners, I'm not over my ex, which is partially true, but mostly a lie. They're not stuck on you as a person. They're stuck on who they could have been if they'd been brave enough to evolve. They're mourning the version of themselves that existed in your presence, the better version, the version that tried harder because you inspired effort. They confess to friends, I think I made a mistake, which is the understatement of their lifetime. They didn't make a mistake. They made a choice, a series of choices, calculated decisions to prioritize their ego over your heart. And now they're living in the consequence of those choices. And consequence doesn't care about regret. They confess to family, I let someone special go. And family nods and says, well, if it's meant to be, they'll come back. But they won't. You won't. Because you didn't leave. You evolved beyond the space they tried to keep you in. Your silence taught them something they'll never forget and always resent. That they're not the main character in everyone's story. That their absence isn't devastating to someone who found peace in it. That some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt because the person on the other side doesn't want to cross back. They're confessing because confession is supposed to bring relief. That's what they were taught. Admit your wrongs, feel lighter, move forward. But it's not working, because you're not there to hear it, because the apology isn't reaching its destination, because saying I'm sorry to a stranger doesn't undo what they did to you. It just reminds them that they lost the only person whose forgiveness would have actually mattered. And that's the prison your silence built. Not made of walls, but of absence. Not made of anger, but of indifference. Not made of revenge, but of peace they can't access. They're out here telling bartenders, I had someone who really saw me. And the bartender's pouring another drink thinking, yeah, everyone's got one of those. They're telling therapists, I sabotaged the best thing in my life. And the therapist is taking notes thinking, that'll be $300, same time next week. They're telling internet strangers, how do you forgive yourself? And the strangers are typing, time heals all wounds, which is the kind of generic garbage that sounds comforting but means nothing, because time doesn't heal intentional cruelty. Time doesn't erase the memory of how they treated someone who would have walked through fire for them. Time just gives them more days to realize what they lost and more nights to regret how they lost it. Your silence didn't just break them. It revealed them to themselves, to the world, to anyone paying attention. And here's the truly beautiful, poetic, devastating part. You're not thinking about them, not in the way they're thinking about you. Sure, maybe a memory surfaces now and then, a song, a place, a random Tuesday, but it doesn't control you. It doesn't define you. It doesn't derail you. You've integrated that chapter into your story as a lesson, not a life sentence. You've taken the pain they caused and alchemized it into wisdom. You've turned their rejection into redirection. You've transformed their betrayal into boundaries. You've converted their absence into peace. And they can feel it, energetically, spiritually, however you want to frame it. They can feel that you're free, and it's killing them because they're still chained. Chained to the guilt, chained to the what-ifs, chained to the knowledge that they had a diamond and treated it like dust. They're confessing to strangers because they can't confess to you, because you've made yourself unavailable for their guilt trips. You've removed yourself from their emotional dumping ground. You've logged out of their drama. You've unsubscribed from their chaos. And that unavailability, that boundary, it's the most powerful position you could hold. You're not ignoring them out of spite. You're protecting your peace out of self-respect. You're not silent because you have nothing to say. You're silent because they've lost the privilege of hearing your voice. And privilege, once revoked, can't be demanded back. They're learning that now. In therapy sessions, in drunk conversations, in sleepless nights where they're scrolling through old messages, wondering when exactly they lost you, wondering if there was a single moment or 1,000 small moments that added up to your exit. The confession booth they've built is permanent now. It's their new normal. They'll be telling this story for years. I once knew someone, and the sentence will trail off into regret. They'll be that person at parties who drinks too much and gets melancholic about the one who got away. Except you didn't get away. You walked away, intentionally, consciously, towards something better, toward yourself. And that distinction matters. Getting away implies escape, implies you were trapped and found a crack in the wall. Walking away implies choice, implies you assessed the situation and decided your peace was worth more than their presence. And that choice, that agency, it's what they can't reconcile, because it means they weren't the prize, they were the lesson. And nobody wants to be the villain in someone else's growth story. So they confess, and confess, and confess to therapists who've heard it all before, to bartenders who are counting minutes until shift end, to strangers on the internet who'll scroll past their pain in 3 seconds, to friends who're tired of hearing about it, to new partners who are slowly realizing they're competing with a ghost, to anyone who will listen and some who won't. They're bleeding out loud while you're healing in silence. They're screaming into voids while you're building empires in quiet. They're desperately seeking validation that they weren't that bad while you're not seeking anything because you already found it, found yourself, found peace, found strength in the stillness, found power in the pause, found freedom in the silence they thought would break you. Your silence didn't just break them, it rebuilt you. Every day they spent analyzing what went wrong, you spent building what goes right. Every hour they spent justifying their actions, you spent aligning with your values. Every minute they spent crafting narratives for strangers, you spent creating a life they're not invited to witness. And that's the final twist they didn't see coming. They thought your silence was temporary, a phase, a tactic, a manipulation. They thought if they waited long enough, you'd crack. You'd reach out. You'd need closure. You'd want answers. You'd seek revenge. You'd do something, anything to prove you still cared. But you didn't. You just lived, fully, authentically, powerfully. And your life became the answer to every question they keep asking strangers. Do you think they're happy? Yes. Do you think they've moved on? Completely. Do you think they ever think about me? Not in the way you hope. Do you think they regret cutting me off? Not even a little. Do you think there's a chance? Not in this lifetime. Those are the answers they're terrified to hear, so they don't ask anyone who actually knows you. They ask strangers who will give them hope, who will say, maybe they're just protecting themselves. Maybe they'll come around. Maybe they need more time. And they hold on to those maybes like life rafts. But maybes aren't promises. They're just comfortable lies that delay the inevitable acceptance that you're gone and you're not coming back. Not as a friend, not as a lover, not as anything. Because you don't go backwards to people who taught you what forward feels like. They're confessing everything to strangers because strangers won't say what you would say. You had your chance. You wasted it. Now live with that. Strangers offer sympathy. You would offer truth. And they can't handle truth. They never could. That's why they're surrounded by strangers, validating their victimhood instead of surrounded by real ones calling out their accountability. That's why they're in confession booths instead of in genuine reflection. That's why they're talking about you instead of working on themselves. Because talking is easier than transforming. Confessing is easier than changing. Regret is easier than redemption. They want to feel better without being better. Want to be forgiven without making amends. Want to be understood without understanding what they actually did. But here's what their confessions will never accomplish. They'll never undo the damage. They'll never erase the memories. They'll never restore the trust. They'll never rebuild the bridge. They'll never reverse time. They'll never get you back. Because you're not a possession they misplaced. The choice to value yourself more than you valued their potential. The choice to protect your peace more than you protected their feelings. The choice to walk away from people who only appreciated you in retrospect. And that choice stands. Permanent, final, absolute. Your silence isn't a punishment. It's a boundary. And boundaries don't negotiate. So let them confess. Let them tell bartenders and therapists and internet strangers and whoever else will listen about the one they lost. Let them paint themselves as the misunderstood victim. Let them rewrite history to soothe their conscience. Let them do whatever they need to do to sleep at night. Because you're sleeping just fine. Without their validation, without their explanation, without their presence. You're sleeping in a peace they'll spend years trying to find. And every confession they make to strangers is just another reminder that you're no longer available for their emotional chaos, that you've graduated from their classroom of dysfunction, that you've evolved beyond their frequency of toxicity, that you've ascended to a level they can't reach because they're still crawling through the mud of their own making. Your silence broke them so badly they're confessing everything to strangers. And that's not your burden to carry. That's their consequence to endure. You didn't break them. They broke themselves against the rock of your boundaries, against the wall of your self-respect, against the fortress of your peace. You were just solid, unmovable, unbreakable, and they shattered, trying to crack you. Now they're picking up pieces, showing them to strangers, asking if anyone can help them make sense of the mess. But the mess isn't you. The mess is them. Always was. You were just the mirror that refused to lie about it. And mirrors don't apologize for reflections. They just show the truth. And the truth is this: you won. Not because you fought, but because you walked away. Not because you screamed, but because you went silent. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you proved yourself right. Right to leave, right to heal, right to choose you. And they'll confess that truth to strangers for the rest of their lives, while you live it in peace, forever.